One of my colleagues at Harvard, Claudia Goldin, has a phenomenal set of papers where she shows that a more flexible labor market is a more equal labor market. And so what we do in the paper that I have, which is joint with one of my PhD students, Ben Posmanek, is we look at what's the effect of labor market flexibility in a part of the labor market where we expect it to be more flexible, namely part-time work. And what we find is something quite surprising. We document that among part-time workers, the gender wage gap between women and men is about 20 to 30 percentage points smaller than the gender wage gap between women and men in the full-time and the overtime segment of the labor market, which is ostensibly a part of the labor market that's a bit less flexible for a number of reasons too. And so this is a new empirical fact that we document. And we find that some of that is going to be due to differences in selection of workers across the full-time versus the part-time segments of the labor market. But then moreover, some of that is going to be just fundamentally due to the fact that in the part-time segment of the labor market, flexibility is arising endogenously within that segment of the labor market because folks are choosing to select into a segment of the labor market that's inherently more flexible. What we find is that among full-time workers, historically the gender wage gap has been a lot larger than the gender wage gap among part-time workers. And that's one of the new facts that we uncover in this paper too, right? And this is going back as far as the 1970s and even continuing on to the present day. Another piece of the paper is we document, which is something that was previously known, that in the 1970s and the 1980s you had gender wage convergence. So every year women were gaining about 1 percentage point per year relative to men in terms of reducing the gender wage gap. Now that stagnated during the mid-1990s, and this is something that's very well known in labor economics. What we propose in the paper, what we argue in the paper, is that a lot of this slowdown in the rate of gender wage convergence was as a result of the Family and Medical Leave Act, which was passed in 1993. And what this act did was it allowed for both women and men to exit the labor market for 12 weeks unpaid if they had a family reason or some other kind of medical reason to leave the labor market. And coincident with the passage of this law, we see a slowdown in the rate of gender wage convergence for both full-time and part-time women in terms of the gender wage gaps. And what we're able to do is we're able to look at similar FMLA type policies that were passed in some states prior to 1993, using a differences in differences kind of a design. And we also see too that there's a slowdown in the rate of gender wage convergences after the passage of these laws, which were ostensibly trying to promote labor market flexibility. So what's the big takeaway from our paper? There are these two facts. One is that the gender wage gap among part-time workers is a lot smaller than the gender wage gap among full-time workers. And then the second fact is going to be that the rate of gender wage convergence seems to have slowed down in response to policies that were trying to promote labor market flexibility. And so our takeaway from this is that a more flexible labor market is a more equal labor market under the context that that flexibility is arising endogenously within the context of the labor market, which is the case with part-time contracts, right? This gender wage gaps are something that's important like across the globe. And especially when we think about within the Latin American context and in the Caribbean context, where this is also going to be important as well too. And so one of the things that I hope that comes out of the work that we've done is that there's additionally like more focus on these types of part-time arrangements and trying to think about how do these part-time arrangements promote equality among wages between women and men, but also what's the trade-off in terms of the amenities that you might not get in these part-time jobs, right? And this is going to be especially important in contexts like Latin America, where there's a larger informal sector, where potentially you might have more folks selecting into part-time work within the informal sector, right? And then you layer on top of that what we call the Uberification of the global economy, where more workers are starting to participate in segmented task-oriented jobs. So for example, with Uber, you can choose when you want to work, how you want to work, how long you want to work as well too. And so this layer of informality coupled with increasing technology that's allowing workers to be more flexible in terms of how they work, I think could potentially have a differential impact within Latin America and the Caribbean.